Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Deep Dive podcast. I'm excited for this one. It is the free agency preview. Free agency, of course, starting on Wednesday, which is just in a couple days. The Kraken poised to be quite aggressive, if you believe what Ron Francis has said, going into free agency. So we'll see what's going on there. Dylan, are you excited for free agency? And I can see the background behind you looks a little different than usual.
Yeah, up here in Gig Harbor, Washington, at the grandparents' house. So we'll see if the camera holds up for me for the video portion of this podcast. Yeah, I'm pretty excited for free agency. Some of the names that we've been talking about for a while with the Kraken maybe targeting coming off the board as they re-sign with their current teams. But as I understand it, there might also be some additional players available now after today that we can talk about.
That's right. Today was the qualifying offer deadline for restricted free agents, and a surprising amount of RFAs were not qualified by their teams. I know there were certainly some surprises. Ilya Samsonov in Washington, the Stromes in Chicago, some guys that still can be very productive players. But the big Kraken news, of course, is their announcement as far as which RFAs will be qualified and which will not. And I know this will disappoint, no doubt, some Kraken fans here. So the Kraken issued qualifying offers to Morgan Geekie, Cole Lind, Alexander True, Carson Twarynski, and Cale Fleury. Now, those not receiving qualifying offers were Ryan Donato, Hayden Fleury, Dennis Cholowski, and Daniel Sprong. So Ryan Donato, of course, probably the biggest name on that list. A lot of Kraken fans, I'm sure, were very much hoping that Donato would be back for next season and in their plans. While that's still not out of the cards entirely, he's free to sign another deal with the Kraken. He will become an unrestricted free agent in a couple days, and it's definitely looking less likely that he will be in Seattle next season.
Yeah, that one, it was surprising. Again, like all season, since really the first game of the season, we had been talking about him being this guy that like, oh, wow, maybe he's finally found his forever home in Seattle. After bouncing around multiple spots before, he kind of seemed like he was on his way out of the league. And we were really excited by that. He was kind of quickly became a fan favorite, all of those big moments, franchise firsts and stuff that he was accumulating for the team. And we were, very, very early on talking about, okay, we got to extend this kid. But it was always like, well, they tend not to like to negotiate during the season. We'll wait till the off season. But it just seemed like such a natural fit. He was playing so well here. He seemed to get along with everybody. The fans really enjoyed him. The only thing I can think of is that they just couldn't come to, terms on money. Like that's the only thing I could think of, is that he wanted a longer extension that either Ron Francis wasn't willing to give him, or they were just too far apart in what the dollar figure was. Like, Donato might really be trying to turn this, one good season into that kind of life-changing contract that all NHL players are kind of chasing. I don't know that it's realistic for that season. That's the only thing I can think of that's what didn't get done.
Yeah, I think that could be it. I think also likely all of these restricted free agents that the Kraken had were arbitration eligible. So that also plays a pretty big factor. All of them had arb rights. And so with Ryan Donato, even if he does accept that qualifying offer, it's not like the Kraken would only have to give him that. They would potentially have to go to arbitration. You'd get that arbitration award from, an independent arbitrator. You don't know what they're going to decide. And the Kraken would either have to kind of accept that. And actually, I don't think they have the option to walk away at that level of salary unless it's over $4 million or something. So that could have messed them up cap wise as well. I think that may have scared them off. But still, I'm surprised to see Donato not be qualified. He really did everything he could have possibly done to make a positive impression last season. But I guess it does also fit with the team's plans. If they are going to be really aggressive signing forwards in free agency, maybe the roster spot just isn't there either.
Yeah.
Now,
that's again the only thing.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's it. That's all I can
Okay.
think of is just that it doesn't fit in their grand plan.
Yeah. Now, looking at some of these other players who were not qualified, Hayden Fleury's name also stands out. He was more of a regular last season. That his minimum qualifying offer would have had to been over $1.5 million. So I wasn't surprised to see him not go qualified. But is there anything more to that? What do you think? Good idea there, Dylan?
Yeah, I think so. I just don't feel like this was going to be a long-term fit for him. Honest, at times to get playing time, it always was kind of a struggle as to see who he was going to be paired with defensively with the kind of existing guys that they had. It kind of felt like certainly as the season went on, this was not going to be a long-term relationship between team and player.
Yeah, it certainly had that feeling, and especially I think the last nail in the coffin, unfortunately, was just his injury too at the end of the season, getting a concussion when there would have been a lot more playing time available for him, and unfortunately, just not in the cards for Hayden Fleury. So I don't think he'll be coming back. Donato, maybe there's a chance, but Fleury certainly not. So that's it for the Kraken's RFA news. So we've kind of slotted those guys into the roster. So at this point, heading into free agency, Dylan, where's the Kraken roster at? What are things looking like for Seattle? What's the kind of the current state of the team?
Well, the current state of the team is that with the couple exceptions that we just talked about, it's basically the same team that we're going to see, right? Looking at those, bringing back some of the guys that they qualified, let's say that they go ahead, we know they've already signed Kuhlman. Let's say they come to terms with Cole Lind, Morgan Geekie. I think Cale Fleury is going to probably be on the NHL roster for this season. Let's just go ahead and assume that he is. Then really you're looking at like 19 guys coming back that we already know about, which means there's 2 roster spots open.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? If we're gonna say that, hey, Cole Lind has earned a spot on the NHL roster full time. Cale Fleury, he's earned a spot on the NHL roster full time. Morgan Geekie, he's gonna hang around on the NHL roster. Then we're really only talking about bringing in a couple of players. If one of those happens to be Shane Wright, then one of those spots is there's even one less spot. So I think free agency, I don't know how aggressive Ron Francis is going to be unless the organization really views some of these guys like Lind, Fleury, Geeky as more, kind of like the McCormicks and the Trues that we saw from last year, where, hey, they're mostly going to be AHL guys that we just kind of call up when we need someone to plug a hole.
Right. And that's kind of what really is the big decision that Ron Francis has to make, is how do you view those players? I think no matter what, you probably shouldn't view them as the players that are going to make you a playoff team. Looking at what this team is now, it's just not a playoff team. We saw that from last season. And so when you talk about having 1 or 2 roster spots open, you have to decide, do you want to fill those with guys who you think can turn this into a playoff team, or do you want to kind of leave it more to chance? And that's something that Ron Francis has had, I think now we can probably call it mixed messages about, given that he talked about wanting to be aggressive in free agency and the goal being to make the playoffs next season, specifically next season. That kind of talk around the trade deadline at the end of the season. But when we talked to him before the NHL entry draft, it sounded like he kind of backed off of that talk a little bit, talked about how important it is to have all these draft picks to build that cupboard of prospects, kind of shied away from the talk about using those draft picks as ammunition to go get guys in trades. And at the end of the day, he ended up using all those draft picks. He traded a couple of them to trade up, but didn't end up acquiring any players with that. So kind of left us with this question of how aggressive are they going to be? Because free agency, this is really the last part of the offseason. If you're not aggressive now and getting guys, that's it. This is kind of the roster that you're left with, more or less. So Dylan, I guess I'll ask you, what do you think is in Ron Francis's mind? What kind of direction do you think he's going to take? Is he going to be as aggressive as he may have hinted earlier on, or is he kind of backing off of that? And does Shane Wright have anything to do with that?
I think Shane Wright kind of threw a wrench in the works for the plan. I really do, because of the potential for him to be ready to play this year, and what it means long term for the franchise. You have your two cornerstone centermen, right? These two pillars of your lineup that we know are going to be there for 7, 8, 10 plus years. And at some point, assuming, Maddie's already looked very good at the NHL level, assuming Shane Wright is as advertised, you're going to have to pay those guys at some point. And so you do have to have kind of a long-term outlook looking at them. You want to assume the best, and that means that these guys are going to be paid a lot, right? Like there's a good chance
Yep.
if, Matty Beniers turns into a superstar that we think he is, and he scores at basically a point per game, you know, pace, and he continues to be great defensively, he's a true number one center, all that stuff, you're looking at easy a $10 million cap hit for him, most likely. So you have to kind of start planning ahead for that. And if Shane Wright kind of turns into something similar, you might be looking at like 8.5, 9 for him. So all of a sudden, you got to start planning for those cap hits. You don't want to go out and spend a bunch of money on a John Klingberg or a Johnny Gaudreau right now, not kind of having a plan of, hey, we might, yes, that'll be one big contract to have on the books, but in the future, we know for sure we're going to have two more. And as we've talked about, just look at Toronto. It's really hard to exist with three. Like you can probably make it work with three, but you certainly can't have more than that. So I think the addition of Shane Wright just long term is going to cause them to maybe not throw around as much cash this offseason. And then I think it also adjusts what the roster could even look like this upcoming season. If they want Shane Wright to be at the NHL level and get his feet wet there, then really you're counting this year as more of a developmental year for Maddie and Shane. And so does it make sense to go heavy in free agency this year, or just, keep the cap space open, go ahead, let the team be bad, but focus on development and be super aggressive next year while you can still take advantage of the few ELC years you'll have left with those guys? So in my opinion, I'd rather the Kraken kind of stay away from things this year because of Shane Wright. We've talked about I'd bring him in as a third, line center if you can. And I think they should be looking at any major additions through free agency in the lens of, hey, we got to pay these guys in a couple of years, and those contracts should be focused once we're more ready to compete.
I agree with you. I think that would be the wise move, is to kind of back off. We've talked about this a little bit on the draft podcast, where we're talking about Shane Wright and what this does to the Kraken's outlook. And I think that next season is probably the year to really go for it. I think we kind of agreed on that. But Ron Francis has talked about wanting to compete, wanting to be a playoff team next season, and we kind of we thought that he may be feeling pressure, whether it's from ownership, whether it's from just external factors, really, about having this window where you need to kind of capture fan interest in this city. And there are some non-hockey reasons that you might want to be competitive right away. And even though you have Shane Wright, I don't know that that's gone away completely. I would hope that that would take some pressure off of him. And from how he's talking, it sounds like it might have. But I don't know that it's gone completely. And I think he probably wants to at least have a roster that maybe has a chance at competing for a playoff spot. Certainly is better than last year. I think taking a step back and really trying for Connor Bedard and having that approach the offseason just isn't in the cards right now, realistically. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. Ultimately, that's probably, you're right on that. I think that the roster is going to naturally be better than it was last year. Like having Matty Beniers for a full season is going to be a big difference. Like there's a reason that they did not have their first 3-game win streak until he was there. You know what I mean? Like he makes that much of a difference. He scored, you know what I mean? Like just his ability to create offense and drive offense for that team was so noticeable and so difference making. I think there's no way that the Grubauer is going to take half a year and just be like the worst goalie in existence again. Like that's probably not going to happen. Some of those 1-game losses are going to go the Kraken's way this year. They had really bad shooting luck. Like there was a lot of contributing factors that caused them to be as bad as they were. Like don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they were a great team, obviously, but I do think they were just going to inherently be a little bit better. Yes, it's possible that they go out. It's just I don't think Ron Francis is the kind of guy to look at this UFA market now and say, well, there's only like one big splashy forward left in Johnny Gaudreau, and I have to compete with 10 other teams to get him. Like the price is going to be so ridiculously high that I think regardless of what pressures he's facing from hey, we need to be better, we need to give the fans more, give season ticket holders more. I just think he's not the kind of guy that's going to bend to that pressure. Like
Hmm.
he doesn't like me as that kind of individual through his playing days and everything. You know what I mean? So I think if the number for someone like a Johnny Gaudreau works, he'll do it. But I'm just having this feeling that maybe John Klingberg is the guy. Like that's I don't want him to be. We'll talk about that later, but
Yeah.
I'm kind of feeling like that might be the direction they go. Is in the a little slightly cheaper route, but still big enough to kind of give people something.
That would certainly be in line with how Ron Francis has operated in the past. And like you said, we will talk about that a little bit later when we get to the defenseman section of talking about free agents. But yeah, I've got to agree. I don't think he's going to force anything. If he was, eager to do that, I think he would have forced a Kevin Fiala trade or, forced a DeBrincat trade because he was in a position to get those done. And if he was that desperate, he could have. With the 4th overall pick in tow, he could have gotten those deals done, chose not to, and I think it's for the best. The Kraken ended up with Shane Wright at that spot. So that's kind of the Kraken's outlook on free agency. And I think as we look at the different positions on Ron Francis's wish list here, I think we should try and look at it also from the perspective of, one, if you're not trying to force anything and just letting be what it is, but also if you do feel that pressure to be aggressive, because I think it's still a possibility and we just don't know what he's going for. So I think we'll try and look at it from both of those perspectives. So I think the way we're going to do this is we're going to look at the positions of need on Ron Francis's, I guess, wish list that he talked about at the end of the season. And those positions were top 6 forward, top 9 forward, puck moving, preferably right-handed defenseman, someone who can quarterback a power play. We've all seen this. We know this is a Kraken need. And then adding to that since then is a backup goalie. Now that wasn't a need going into the offseason, but of course with Chris Drieger's injury, they're going to get someone else at the NHL level. Ron Francis basically confirmed that before the draft. So those are the 4 positions that we're really going to look at and see where the Kraken could add, who they should add, who they shouldn't, what we think they'll do, and what we hope they don't do, that sort of thing. Now, before we dive into all of this, because I do want to just get to talking about the players as fast as we can, but Dylan, this is coming. I think there's a public service announcement that we need to get out of the way before talking about free agency. I've mentioned this in some articles that I've done before and a video examining whether the Kraken should sign a Gaudreau, Forsberg, Burakovsky, Nichushkin. I looked at those 4 guys, 2 of them off the market now. But I looked at kind of whether the Kraken should sign different tiers of free agent forwards. And when you run the numbers, when you look at it, free agency is almost always a bad idea. I like to bring up a great article by Dom Lucian of The Athletic that he did in 2020, and he looked at 10 years of free agency data from 2010 to 2020, and the results are just kind of staggering. And he uses wins, which is basically like a wins above replacement type stat. It's an all-encompassing player value stat, but he looks at free agent contracts, and I'll just throw a few of these results out here. In that time, teams paid for 844 wins in free agency, actually received 217 wins. Teams only get about a quarter of the value for every dollar they spend in free agency, is what that means. And it happens right away. Teams get only about 28% of expected value in year 1 of the contract. So it often goes bad immediately. In fact, only 30.8% of free agents are still in the NHL by the 6th year of their contract. So if you're looking at signing guys to term, chances are they will not even be in the NHL by the time that contract is up. So be very wary of those 6+ year deals, no matter how good the player is. Even when you get to these top end players, that still holds true. And then he measured surplus value. So, value of wins based on how many wins you pay for. And that out of 468 total contracts signed, just 96 of them, that's only 21%, had a positive surplus value. So about a 20% success rate you're looking at when you sign free agents. And a lot of those are depth guys too. The majority of these successful free agent signings where you do get a surplus are third and fourth liners who are signed to very low cap hit deals where you kind of find these depth guys and that you can bring in. Those are the best deals. And so you have to be very careful when signing these high end free agents. So I think it's just something that everyone should know when going into this. In unrestricted free agency, it is buyer beware. You are not getting these players' peak years. I know Dylan has talked about how I like to bring up the downward sloping aging curves and all of this and be all depressing, but I think it needed to be said. Anything to add to this, Dylan, or subtract from it if you feel that needs to be done?
No, I think you nailed it pretty good. I mean, the numbers don't lie to a certain extent there. You know what I mean? Like, unless you truly think you're getting the outlier, you kind of have to plan for this and account for it.
Exactly. So we'll keep that in mind, and I think that'll kind of color some of the discussion over these free agents. So let's start with probably the most exciting of the areas of need for the Kraken, top six forward. Now, this is no surprise. Anyone who watched the Kraken last season knows that they need goals. They need goal scoring, do not score enough. I think everyone knows that. So free agency is a place where you could address that. They chose not to address it via trade for, say, a Kevin Fiala or an Alex DeBrincat. But there's still a couple pretty good goal scorers on the free agent market this year. And we have to start with the biggest name, the biggest star, guy coming off a pretty darn good season. What is it, 115 points? No, how many points did he get? 100 something.
It was like it was a lot.
Yeah, it was over 100-point season. I have his numbers for the playoffs and regular season combined in front of me.
40 goals.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So Johnny Gaudreau, there's no doubting the talent, right, Dylan? I mean, he is a legit star winger in the NHL, right?
Yeah, he's the kind of guy who can do it all. He can be your stud-up man. He can be your finisher. He's really good at playing. I would describe it kind of as loose. Like, he doesn't need a ton of structure around him. In fact, he kind of thrives when there isn't necessarily as much structure because he's just a really smart kind of reactive player where he can just see where the holes are opening up on a defense and he'll adjust himself in his own game to take advantage of that. And that's really why he's been so successful despite being smaller. Right, 5'9", 170. What is this? 165 is what he's listed at on Cap Friendly. He's probably a little heavier than that, but the fact that with that size he's able to produce in today's NHL tells you that he's got to be a pretty smart player.
Absolutely. And would he be a fit? Just ignoring the contract, looking on the ice, would he be a fit for this Kraken team?
I think he's probably a fit anywhere because of how smart he is. Like, he'll learn and adjust to play with whoever you have. But I think especially for the Kraken, as I was kind of, in armchair GM mode on Cap Friendly, moving things around after these qualifying offers and we knew who was staying, who was going. To me, the glaring kind of hole in this Kraken lineup, at least for the forwards, is at left wing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they are pretty stacked on the right side now. Maybe, you could argue whether or not there's a lot of talent on that right side, but they got a lot of guys who play on that right side now. They do not have a lot of guys playing on the left side. And Johnny Gaudreau would slot in very, very, very nicely alongside Matty Beniers on that first line.
Agreed. So I think on the ice, he's a fit. Let's talk contract. So Johnny Gaudreau, if he signs with the team other than the Flames, so if he goes to market, he will sign a 7-year deal. That's confirmed. You got to go max term. That is the max allowed term for these free agents. So he will sign a 7-year deal. And Evolving Wild's projection, and they've done a pretty good job with these projections. I think they've been pretty spot on, at least early in these off seasons with the re-signings, is at a $10.9 million cap hit over 7 years. Now, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of cap space. And I have to think, too, if it's the Kraken, not really a playoff competitive team, I'd say it's probably a little higher than that. I'd say it probably starts with 11. I wouldn't be surprised to see 11 or 11.5 being what it takes to get Johnny Gaudreau. So very big ticket. It's a big commitment over a lot of years. You're getting, let's see, he'll be 29 by the time next season starts. So you're getting, 29 to, well, basically 35, 36 age
Yeah,
season.
35, yeah.
So it's some non-peak years, but should be pretty good in those first few years. Let's talk about it. Should the Kraken do it or not? I wrote a whole article based on this, basically, but should they do it?
Well, here's my only like kind of reasoning to say yes, they should. Outside of the fact that look, he's going to instantly inject your lineup with, more offense than basically they've ever had, right? And could dream of in its current state. Obviously, the cap has stayed pretty flat over the last couple of years, but we know it's not going to stay flat forever, and that there are even some people that are projecting pretty aggressive increases over the next couple seasons. If the Kraken feel, if Ron Francis, if the organizations themselves have access to kind of really what the financials of the league are, and you think that the cap is going to aggressively go up, and you think we're only a handful of years really from pushing towards $100 million for the cap, then I say, yeah, you know what? Go ahead and lock in Johnny Gaudreau this offseason. Don't wait until next offseason when we might have the cap go up and everybody goes up. This might be your last time to lock down these players while you can still use a flat cap to your advantage, as far as saying, well, look, because otherwise, right, free agency in sports, it's all about pushing so that each guy is the new highest paid guy, all that kind of stuff. This is your one chance to kind of take advantage of a somewhat stagnant marketplace.
Yeah, I think
That's literally all. That's literally all I could come up with as a reason to do it. Is that hey, the cap might go up, so it might not look too bad come year 5, 6, 7.
Right, and that's it's a good point. That's a good reason. You could cite to do it. I think if anyone's read my article, I think that they should not do it. I don't think it fits for the core of where the team is at and helping everyone out. And especially you mentioned having to sign Matty Beniers and potentially Shane Wright to these huge deals. You're at the risk of Toronto Maple Leafing yourself with these big deals and Gaudreau on the books. Now, I'm going to make my argument for why they should do it, or a reason that they should do it. If the Kraken still intend to go for it this season, which could possibly be the case, we don't know if it is or isn't, and they're really trying to put together a playoff roster, and Ron Francis is committed to this because he feels that they cannot have another season like they did last season. It just cannot happen. If they come to that conclusion, then I think that signing Gaudreau is probably the least bad thing that they can do. Should they do it? No. But the window is pushed up a little bit with Shane Wright. Maybe they feel they can kind of thread the needle a little bit, that they can be competitive, that Wright and Beniers can be good enough in Gaudreau's window where he's still good enough that maybe it can work. And honestly, we'll get to these names later, but it's better than signing some of these alternatives. Say you're going to sign Burakovsky and Klingberg because you feel you need to make the playoffs. I'd rather you sign Gaudreau than do that. It might be the least bad option they have if they're going to be aggressive. That's my only case to do it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think as we look at other options for a top 6 forward, I think I might lean more towards the choosing one of the aging guys, the already aging guys with shorter term. I think that might be their better option. But I agree in the sense of if you're going for it, you better go all out, because the bottom line is, since Forsberg re-signed with Nashville, Gaudreau is the only true like lineup changing superstar left. Burakovsky was successful in the best possible environment. He had tons of lineup and matchup protection. He had amazing players he could play with. Like, the stars were perfectly aligned for Burakovsky. Wherever he goes in free agency, he is not going to repeat the performance, even if you give him more playing time. I refuse to believe that Andrei Burakovsky is going to be this like 35 or 30 goal scorer in your lineup wherever he's going, unless he's going somewhere. He's gonna go play with Crosby or something. I don't know. But like, that's kind of what it would take for him to be successful. I feel like Johnny Gaudreau can play with anybody. Obviously, it'll affect his production. We know, look in his past, he has had some down years. But that was also, I think, coaching played some roles in that, and overall franchise weirdness in Calgary, I think, contributed overall. But I do feel like, yes, if you're going for it, he's the only option, and you go all in. If you're going for it, you have to go all in, and you kind of bet the farm on him.
Yep, agreed. So that's kind of where we're at with Gaudreau. Would rather they not do it, but if you're going to go for it, that's the option you should take. Now, you just mentioned him, so I guess we'll go straight to him next. Andre Burakovsky. He's another option to add some scoring. You mentioned you do not like him as much as Gaudreau. He's definitely not on that level. What do you think? Yes or no for Andre Burakovsky?
No, I want to completely stay away from him.
Yes.
Like I don't think that performance is repeatable. Like I just said, he's going to cost way too much for what he's going to be able to deliver, especially in a lineup like Seattle's.
Yeah, there are two players in this free agent class that worry me the most, as far as I think the Kraken just might sign them, and they definitely should not. Andre Burakovsky is one of those two. I think he's going to get term. He's going to get over 6 million, maybe over 6.5 on a 5-6+ year term. And I do not think the Kraken should do that. It would be a big mistake. He was very successful with all these great players around him in Colorado, like you mentioned. And even some of the underlying numbers might show you, okay, there's some room for improvement. He didn't really get power play time. He was playing third line minutes. But I think the talent around him more than made up for that. And also, you have to look at the entire game with him. Yes, he can score, but defensively, not much to write home about. To the point where he was a healthy scratch for the Avs during the playoffs. I mean, that should tell you a lot. You're not most teams aren't going to give 6+ years of term to someone who's a healthy scratch throughout a playoff run. It's just a trap. I think it's a mistake waiting to happen. I hope the Kraken do not sign Burakovsky.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
All right, so moving on, let's go to Burakovsky's teammate in Colorado, Nazem Kadri. Now, he's someone that was rumored to be going potentially to the Kraken. They were one of the two teams that I think that Elliot Friedman said that, could sign the check for Kadri. What was it rumored? It was 8 to 10 mil
Yeah.
over probably a 7-year term, because I think he has the leverage to command a 7-year term, given the last season that he had, given how desperate teams are for centers. Do you think, first of all, do you think the Kraken are still interested in Nazem Kadri after drafting Shane Wright?
No, I think the Shane Wright draft, getting him in the draft, there's no reason to really be looking at centers with 7-year terms left if you're the Kraken, because you already know who your 1-2 is going to be. And if you're looking for a more experienced option to have around long term, you would extend Yanni Gord when the time comes. So I don't know that Kadri is realistic at all for the Kraken at this point.
Right, and I'm glad for that. That might be one of the best unintentional consequences of Shane Wright being drafted to Seattle. Is I don't think they're going to be on the market for Nazem Kadri anymore, and I think that contract probably is going to be the biggest mistake for whoever signs it of all the free agents this year. Certainly, if he gets that kind of number, 8.5 to 10 million over 7 years for a player who'll be 32 by the time the puck drops next season, and who had a major statistical outlier season. I forget the exact numbers, but there was a tweet from JFresh Hockey who talked about that. And it's like just points per game, or sorry, it's like points per 82 game season for Nazem Kadri over the course of his career. And it was just like 50, 50, 60, 50, 50, 100. This season is a major outlier. So good thing the Kraken are staying away there. Now, let's move on to another center. This one a little bit older, and I'm interested to ask you about him because it sounds like he is going to market. That is the news today. And maybe as a shorter-term fit, could it work? Could you bump someone out to wing? I don't know. Evgeny Malkin.
Yeah. So all along I was like, nah, he's going to re-sign in Pittsburgh. But yeah, it sounded like he might not. And for a long time, I was like, he doesn't make sense for the Kraken. But as I was looking at things really in the last 24, 48 hours, really in the car ride thinking about this, I kind of really came around to the idea of, I think the Kraken should look at bringing in Evgeny Malkin. And I would do it. I would see if you could limit his term by paying him more. I think that would be a good potential option for the Kraken. You have the cap space. Like I said, you got tons of cap space. You got kind of few-ish roster spots to work around. I'd go ahead and do it for a guy that, you talk about bumping someone to wing. If he's okay playing wing, that solves your left wing problem. You know what I mean? You just flip Malkin out there, and The other thing is I would go ahead and give him a little extra money because I'd be signing him as a player coach, and Evgeny Malkin would be the new power play coach of the Seattle Kraken, and I
Mm.
guarantee the power play would jump. and but yeah, I think he solves a couple things. He brings kind of a different angle on the veteran leadership, aspect side of things to the Kraken. I think now that he's older, I think the idea of playing on the wing would not be as like disrespectful sounding to him. But if you ever need him to, you have a good center there. His scoring has not really dropped off despite the injuries and maybe the limited time that he's had around. He scored 20 goals, 42 points in 41 games last year. He's scoring just fine. Like I said, he's a beast on the power play. Like he's a guy who has really adjusted his game as he's gotten older, as he's experienced injuries, as he's slowed down, and I think he brings a lot to the table both on and off the ice that the Kraken could really benefit from.
Yeah, I think he would be a great fit. Yeah, like you said, on and off the ice. Term is the key for me with Malkin, and I think you would agree. What is the maximum term you would go?
4.
You would go 4.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would do everything in my power to keep it at 3
Hmm.
because I don't think he's talking to you for less than 3.
Right.
No matter how much money it is, I just don't think he cares. Um, but I would if 4 is what it took, I would assume that hey, you know what? Given this guy's injury history, that fourth year is going to be an LTIR year.
Right. I mean, I suppose you could bank on that and hope for that. It is a little risky there, especially with the 35 plus contract if you structure it that way. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, of course, he'll be 36 by the time next season starts. 4-year deal could be pretty risky, and you're risking eating into those years where you have Shane Wright and Matty Beniers on those big contracts. I would not go over 3, but if you can keep it to 3, I think he could be a good fit.
Yeah, I would certainly like I would be open to exploring something where yeah, the money is kind of egregious if you kept it to 3.
Yeah.
Because you got Shane Wright on an ELC for 3 years, Matty for another 2. Like you can survive that one last year with Matty getting paid and everything, and if to keep it at 3 you got to jump to 9, go ahead and jump to 9. What do you care? You know what I mean? Like you've got the cap space if you're the Kraken.
Yeah, all it does is limit you from, I think, being a little more aggressive next off season, and that's why I would worry about it.
I don't know. The Kraken have shown us one thing. Ron Francis has shown us one thing in his tenure as the Kraken general manager. He can find these depth pieces that are going to be okay. They're not really going to produce offensively, but you know what? They're not going to be disastrous defensively, and you can just fill out your bottom 6 with endless amounts of these guys on cheap under $1 million deals. So as the starts to go up again after this season, or as we assume after this season, as the cap continues to go up, I think the bigger contracts you're going to start having to worry about less and less with the Kraken. As I was talking about last time in the pre-draft pod we did, a lot of these contracts, the kind of seemingly core guys now, their contracts are gone after 2 years from now. So I think things would open up as your windows and expectations around Maddie and Shane Wright are going to work. I think all that stuff opens up anyway for you.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely some juggling they'd have to do as far as managing the years and who's being paid what when. But as we've seen, Malkin could be an intriguing option for the Kraken. So I'm on this page and it's just kind of sorted by points per games, points per games played. Next on the list is Evander Kane. Can we just write this off immediately?
Yeah, no, no, no.
Okay, not doing that. Uh, moving on. Let's see. We've already covered Burakovsky. This is an interesting one. David Perron, because I thought that Perron, it was a sure thing that he was going to re-sign with the Blues. I thought this would have been done by now. But according to reports today, it sounds like he's going to test the market and see what's out there. Do you think
Yeah,
that could be a fit for Seattle?
yeah, I think David Perron's kind of the kind of guy that like every team should have. And I've felt that way about this guy like going back forever. Like his Edmonton days, a decade ago about now. Like I've always loved this guy. I think his skill set is perfect in the sense that he kind of scores. He has this ability to score clutch goals for you. He'll contribute on your power play. He's going to be responsible enough, like enough around it. But I just think he's such a big moment player, and the Kraken could have really used that a lot last year. as like a guy that in the clutch on a power play late in a game could break a tie or tie a game up for them. Like I just feel like he'd bring a lot to them, and he'd bring a lot of, on ice leadership too. I feel like this is a guy who's never going to be a captain of a team, but you can just tell that he instills confidence in the guys around him.
Absolutely. He's been great in the Blues locker room for a long time. I think he was a big part of that Golden Knights expansion team and why they did so well. And from a leadership standpoint, too. I still find it hard to believe that he would go anywhere besides St. Louis. I think they'll try and free up the cap space to bring him back. He's never signed a contract with another team besides the Blues. So I still find it hard to think that he's going to move. But if he was willing to talk to the Kraken, if he was willing to go to Seattle, I think he would be a fantastic fit. Would absolutely be on my wish list, but just don't think it's in the cards. Of course, and he'd be another one. He's 34. If you could keep the term manageable, that's what you would need to do. And I think with some of these older guys, like you mentioned, maybe there's a chance of keeping the term manageable. You'd hope so, but I certainly wouldn't go more than 3 years on him.
Right. No. And keep in mind, part of the pitch for these guys is the idea of coming in and playing with Beniers and Shane Wright and understanding that they're going to blossom and turn into, they're going to make this team a Stanley Cup competitor in, let's be real, 3 years is probably the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that's where, if you're talking to any of these older guys like a Perron, he's going to want 4 years, because in his mind, that's going to give him 2 good competitive years at the end, and then in the interim he can help be around for that growing process. And I feel like any of these older players are going to kind of want that 4-year term just to give them maybe 2 good shots at a Stanley Cup with the team instead of just one on the back end.
Agreed. And I think that's kind of where we're hitting the snag with some of these guys, especially some of the older guys, is that they're going to want 1 more year of term than most teams will be willing to offer. But all it takes is one team to give them that, and they can sign for it. And so that's where I think I would kind of back off on most of these free agents, whether it's Malkin wanting a 4th year, Perron wanting a 4th year, where I wouldn't do it. And I kind of hope that Ron Francis holds the line on that. It's better to just say no, walk away and see what else you can do, than to sign for that extra year and potentially have that anchor contract as Shane Wright, as Matty Beniers are right in their competitive window.
Well, let me ask you a question on Perron. What do you think that contract's going to look like? Like, what do you think his AAV will be?
I think it's going to be, I think it'll be 4 years. And then I think it's going to be, let's see, what's his current is 4.
He's coming off 4.
I think it might be a raise. I think 4.5. I think some team will do 4.5. Yeah.
Right, but that's very different than me saying, 9 for Malkin.
Well, actually,
right?
4.5 is with St. Louis, I think. I think if he was hitting the open market, I think it'll do 5.5. Some team will do that.
No, I don't think he's going to do 5.5. Somebody might offer him 5.5, but it would be like New Jersey, and he'd say no.
That's true. It depends how important it is, the money versus the winning. Oh, he's always chosen, though, I think, a good fit team-wise, though, over the money over his career. So I think some team would offer him that, but maybe he wouldn't take it. That's a good point.
I think max, you're talking 5. I think 4.5 is pretty reasonable. If he wants to go to your team, he'll do it for 4.5. I don't see a $4.5 million cap hit really being an albatross around your neck.
But as we've seen with Alex Wenberg, it can still hinder you in certain ways.
Yeah.
If you're paying that for a guy who's a 4th liner at that point of his career. All right. So moving on, we've got, let's just,
We're running out of top 6 potential guys here.
I know, we're already kind of running out. There are not a lot of them. I mean, who else do you see on this list, Dylan, that we want to talk about?
There's a couple guys. There's three guys really that I think should be left in this conversation, and that's Andre Palat, Nino Niederreiter, and Rickard Rakell.
Okay. So who are we starting with?
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and start with Palat. So obviously he's a fantastic guy. Just like Perron, this is a big moment goal scorer. Like you can count on him in the big games. We've seen him do it with Tampa now many years in a row. Like that's just who this guy is. But again, similar to Perron and all those other guys, you're talking about a more aging player. Now the difference being he is slightly younger. So he's going to want more term, and that's why I think the Kraken should stay away. Because if you're him, I would be asking for 7. And someone might be willing to give him 7. I think he's probably going to sign a 6-year deal somewhere. But even still, you're talking about him being 37, 38 by the time that's, ending.
Right, and that's pretty old at that time. If I were him, I'd go for as much term as possible if you're leaving Tampa, because that's the thing with his situation. If you're going to take any kind of a discount in money or term, it's because you're staying with the Lightning. And I think if he's going to leave, he's going to go after money and term, and probably more than the Kraken would want to give. If you can limit the deal to, Evolving Wild's projection is 5.6 million times 3 years. I think that's pretty optimistic term wise. If you could sign that, I would do it. I think that's a good piece there at a good price, but I just don't think he's going to sign for that. I think he's going to get more term. If it's me, I put a hard limit at 3 years on the term. And I also just think about, he's done very well. He was fantastic in the playoffs again this year, but he's got a lot of wear on him. He's played a lot of games and a lot of playoff games over the past 3 years. That can be really tough on a player's body, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him start to have some injury problems now. That would worry me.
Yeah, the other thing is, and this is one thing I've always found interesting about him, is talk about a big moment guy. He basically just waits for the big moments. Like, this is a guy who has won 20-goal season in his entire career, and that came back in 2013-14. Okay? So, like, he had 18 goals this year. A couple years ago, he had 17 in the regular season, but both those years he had 11 in the playoffs. Like, this is a playoff guy. I don't know that the Kraken should be bringing him in for these playoff performances when even with him in the lineup, I don't really think they're going to be a playoff team. You know what I mean? At least not year one.
Right. They're the guys who get you there and the guys who get you through. Palat is one of those guys who gets you through. And I don't know that that's the right fit for the Kraken at this point. I think they still need some help getting there.
Yes, exactly. So let's kind of go from that end of the spectrum to the other with a guy like Nito Niederreiter, who is, been, as Carolina has gotten better, he's starting to put up, really good seasons there again. He's kind of coming back after, really, he hasn't posted a season like this since he was back with the Wild in like 2016, 2017. So, but again, playoffs have not really been his thing with Carolina. Just 5 points in 14 games this last, postseason run for them. And I know kind of Carolina as a whole has underperformed in the playoffs, but he's been one of those guys helping them do that. I've never really seen it with Niederreiter. Like, I know he has a lot of fans, but I've never really seen it, and just for that reason alone, I would, kind of stay away.
Yeah, I would too. Again, like you said, the opposite of Palat. He's one of the guys that gets you there, not one of the guys who gets you through. And yes, he scored 24 goals last season. It's his second straight 20-goal year. He got 20 in just the shortened 56 season, the season before. So he can put up goals. He's another one of those guys that I'm worried, maybe the Kraken will sign, will give too much term, especially Carolina connection. So it worries me a little bit there. And I could see maybe a Jaden Schwartz type of deal almost, since he's younger. He'll be 30 by the time next season starts, so I think will probably be able to command a 5-year term or so. And I just don't think the Kraken should make that kind of commitment at this point to a winger who they're not really sure about. Evolving Wild projects the contract as 5.7 times 7 years, which I certainly would not do.
No.
So I think we can back off of that one.
Yeah. And so then the last guy I wanted, and this kind of kills me because he's part of that special group of people to only play for the aquatic bird teams, aka my previous 2 favorite teams, the Ducks and the Penguins, and that's Rickard Rakell, who started to really drop off those last couple of years in Anaheim, but it could be argued that the whole team was, and I think that for him and like guys like Hampus Lindholm, they did not like that kind of the culture. It kind of dragged them down a little bit as the culture was shifting into rebuild mode. And I think that they were never guys to get on board with that idea. And I think that's partly why their play dropped off. But when you look at Rakell in his prime, when he had, matchup protections and things like that, and he was playing still with really good players, this was a guy that you were going to look at and you were going to say, okay, might not put up a ton of points, but that is a 30 goal scorer in the league. And he was a guy who could contribute in the playoffs in a lot of different ways for you. And he brings a lot of lineup versatility. You can basically play all three forward positions, and he can help out on the PK if you need him to, be good on the power play. I think he'd be someone, it'd be really interested to see if the Kraken look to bring someone like that in, especially because I don't think he's going to cost that much.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you look at the contract projection, it's 6.2 mil times 7 years. I don't think he's going to cost that much. And maybe not
No,
on that kind of term. I mean, that
like
that
not,
projection's kind of baffling to me, honestly, um,
yeah,
given his performance. The thing with
yeah,
Raquel to me is he almost reminds me of another longtime Duck, John Gibson, where, yes, Raquel was a legit 30 goal scorer in the NHL. But you know the last time he was that? 2018. We're
hmm
talking 4 years ago. He's a long time removed from that. And I just haven't seen it for so long that I don't know that you could make that kind of commitment, just hoping that he might return to that level.
yeah. Like I said, I think Gibson, Lindholm, Raquel, like their play dropped off when that team dropped off, like when everything around them evaporated into thin air, or like basically what happened to Ryan Getzloff's hair happened to the rest of that lineup, right? Like it was just gone, completely gone, no sign or trace of it left. Okay, and it affected all of them, and I refuse to believe that all three of those guys decided, hey, we all just turned 20, 26, 27. Let's all get really, really bad together. You know what I mean? Like, I refuse to believe that that was the case for any of those three guys. They go from, Lindholm being this guy that was underappreciated and should be getting Norris potential, votes and stuff, and Gibson as like a perennial borderline Vesna guy, and Raquel as this guy of, hey, you know what? He should probably be a first line center somewhere. Like, I feel like with all three of those guys, this narrative has been, oh, they just dropped off, they're bad now. But it's like, no, the situation around them was like horrible, and I think that that affected them. I think now that Lindholm's in Boston, we'll start seeing something different. I think had Raquel been healthy for the playoffs this year in Pittsburgh, we would have seen a lot different because he was just starting to gel with Crosby. And so I think this is the time to take advantage of players in that situation where you can leverage his poor recent performance to get him in at a decent cap hit. I think you could, if you're willing to give him term, you could probably get him at 4.5. You can't tell me he wouldn't be at least valuable to you as a third line center later on at $4.5 million.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And when you look at his play with the Penguins, it's a small sample size, 19 games, but he was
Yeah,
scoring at a 56-point pace. And that would be
right.
kind of right up there with his 33 goal seasons. It's definitely a gamble, and a bigger one than I would make. But I would understand doing that. And these are the kind of signings that maybe you want to make that kind of straddle the line between going for it and being patient, right? Where you look for these upside guys that maybe can provide good value for you. The track record's not good, but if you feel like you can find the outlier, it might make sense. And this is one of those situations where there's at least a good case to be made why you found the outlier. You talk about with the Ducks that he just kind of, stopped being as motivated, wasn't the best situation. That would make sense. So I probably wouldn't make that bet, but I respect your position that maybe you would.
All right, sounds good. Now, anybody else you think fits this top six billing that you want to talk about?
Uh, Probably not. I mean, Claude Giroux, but I don't think he's going to come to the Kraken. He's staying out east somewhere. Um, yeah, looking at the names, I don't think so. These other guys just kind of fall into the top nine role, and I think there's some guys we should talk about from a top nine
Yeah.
perspective, certainly. So let's move into those
Real
guys.
quick. Real quick. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna one last time say it. Patrick Laine.
Oh yeah, on the trade market, he's an RFA. Yeah, he's not
Hmm
an unrestricted free agent they could sign, but it's still one of those trades they could make. They passed on Fiala, they passed on DeBrincat. Patrick Laine still potentially there, and I would support that.
He's a different breed. I think if there's a trade to be made now, I would do it.
Yep.
But it also feels like maybe things are finally working out for that guy somewhere in Columbus. So I don't know, but I want to put it out into the universe in hopes that maybe it comes true.
Fair enough. The only thing I worry about that is that the ask will be next year's first round pick, and I certainly wouldn't do that.
No, probably not.
All right.
What if it was top 2 protected?
Top what?
Top 2 protected.
I don't. No, because then it could still be fifth or sixth overall. I wouldn't do. I'd do top 10 protected. I wouldn't do top 2.
Patrick Laine in his prime at 5th or 6th overall
in next year's class, and with the guy that's going to be the right age to gel with the core that that you're drafting in Wright and Beniers. No, I wouldn't.
Let us know down in the comments.
Yeah, this is a good one. Yeah, let us know. Do you agree with Dilla? Do you agree with me? Would you do the Laine trade there? Top 2 protected first round pick. All right, so getting into some of these top 9 forwards, because this is where you start getting into those bets like we talked about with Raquel too, where maybe you're trying to find someone who actually can provide good value in the top 9. And I'm going to start with a guy who's kind of near the top of this list when we look at points per game, and that's Mason Marchment. And I think he's one of the more interesting UFAs on the market this year. He's only 27, so it's the youngest possible year to be a UFA. Put up 47 points in 54 games with the Panthers last season. Great scoring numbers. He was only playing third line minutes, but that Panthers team did so well offensively. I mean, he was a plus 29. It's fair to question whether he was driving a lot of that offense. What do you think of Mason Marchment? Also, he's only playing 14 minutes a game. So what do you think of Mason Marchment?
Yeah, that one has more of the opposite. Like that's like you're buying high on someone rather than buying low on someone like Raquel. Like this feels very much the opposite. I don't know. I wish that there was more than just last year. You know what I mean?
But I think a lot of teams feel that way. And I mean, here's the evolving wild contract projection: $2.5 million times 3 years.
I don't think he signs for that little. Like someone's gonna believe in him for more than that.
Maybe. If you can get him, I mean, how high would you go? Times 3 years, because I don't think he's going to get a longer than 3-year term, given how little he's proven himself.
Right. I don't know, 3.5.
I was thinking 3.5, but he's one of the guys where I'm thinking he kind of straddles the line between, are you going for it? He can help you now, but also he can potentially help you in the future if this is what he is, or this is closer to what he is. He could be one of those outliers.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I just think I'd rather take other bets on some of these guys that we're talking about, and or as we transition to talk about a top 9 player instead of a top 6 guy. Like I feel like he fits the mold of a top 6 guy a lot better than he does a top 9 guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. It's just kind of how he plays, where you needed to deploy him, and but if he fits that mold, again, it's a bet. But it's a shorter term bet than I think some of these other guys that you would have to take. And what I'm really looking at now as I look at this list is just term. I want as little term as possible. I want as much flexibility in 3 years as I can possibly get as I really decide, okay, what pieces do you need around this core of Matty Beniers and Shane Wright? I want to be able to go out and get those guys. And especially with my prospect pool, maybe being able to trade prospects and picks for players, kind of like what the Kings did with Fiala as they're getting ready to go and put their foot on the gas. I want to be in position to do that and not have to worry about contracts longer than 3 years.
Yeah, and and there's definitely the argument to be made for that for lots of reasons, and I agree with you in general on the shorter term. And so yeah, if you can get him to do that, similar to finding a buy low candidate who just wants to maybe sign a 2-year deal to show that, hey, in a new situation I can turn it around and do better. I'm all for those deals. Like I said, I worry because that Florida team last year was I don't know, that's up there top 5 all time as far as like lineup protections and matchup, goodness that he was receiving. So I just have a little bit of worry because of it.
No, and I believe you. I know that. I feel like I could put up maybe 10 points on that Florida team last year just by virtue of being in the right places.
You sign him, he's probably, he might end up on your first line here with Seattle.
It's true. You know what?
Let's be
Looking at how
real.
the roster lines up.
So I just worry about that. It's not the gamble I would take. We're just on opposite sides on that one, I think.
Yep. All right. So moving on to some of these, I think these guys fall pretty squarely into what I would call the middle class of free agent forwards, and I've talked about that too in the past, and in that video with Nichushkin and Burakovsky. These guys who are going to sign, maybe 5-year term times 5 mil or something like that, that have a really, really bad track record. So we'll kind of go a little quicker because there's more of them, and I think it's probably going to be no on a lot of them. But let's start with a couple of Rangers, Andrew Kopp and Ryan Strome. Thoughts on those guys?
Ryan Strome's really good. I don't think he fits at all with what the Kraken need now because they
Yep.
don't really need another center. And I just don't think he lines up timeline for them. And I think he's going to want a lot more money.
Yeah, agreed. I think Strome no longer makes sense. Maybe before Shane Wright, if you're going for it, he's one of those guys. Contract projection also 7.2 mil times 7 years. Stay far away from that. Andrew Kopp, I think on the ice fits a little bit more. Is kind of one of those good depth scoring pieces. His projection's 5.8 times 4 years, but you want to be getting those guys on their ELCs or second contracts. That's where they provide value for you. Once they hit UFA status, I think it's time to stay away.
Or, there's going to be lots of guys that are going to be similar to Kopp's performance and value that you could find for a lot less. And one of the things that's kind of confusing is if the Kraken are not, going to be really competitive this year because they don't have a Johnny Gaudreau on their team, I don't even know why Ron Francis would be in the market for a top 9 guy. Like those are the
Right.
kinds of pieces you start adding as you're trying to get over the, second round hump in the playoffs. Not like, hey, what we really need is like a third line winger to score just enough that we can make the playoffs. Like they're not really in that position. So I don't know. I feel like still Shane Wright might really just be the top 9 addition that the Kraken have
Right.
this year.
And I could definitely see that. But also, if they strike out on Gaudreau, I think Francis is going to feel some pressure to sign somebody. And maybe it won't even be one of those guys in the top 6. It might be one of these guys like maybe not Strome or Kopp because we went over the fit wasn't there. But let's see. We talked Trocheck on some earlier podcasts. I don't think he's really a fit for the Kraken anymore.
No, I don't think he's going to be a fit for the Kraken. No centers can be around really anymore. But there is someone, RJ, my boy,
Who is it?
Vladislav Nemestikov. Let's go.
Okay. See, I had to scroll down a little bit further to get to him. But you know what? That one is actually one that could make sense. Nemestikov is someone who could be maybe a little bit cheaper. These are the kind of value signings I'm talking about. You scroll past, the names that are probably going to get some more money. The Stromes, the Kopps, the Trocheks, the Mikheyevs of the Niederreiters of the world. And you get to someone like a Vladislav Nemestikov, who somehow just gets lost on whatever team has him. It feels like, if you're not paying attention, you'd be surprised he's in the NHL. But he was actually pretty productive last season.
Yeah, he was. And he really helped Dallas, like in all the stuff they were trying to do late last year and into the playoffs. He's not going to be a guy who's going to score a bunch, but really, as we get away from the Ryan Stromes of this top 9 conversation, none of these guys are going to score a bunch for you. So you have to start looking at the other things they're going to bring. And Nemestikov consistently, going all the way back to his time in Tampa, has been he's one of the hardest working guys out there anytime he's on the ice. And I feel like he'd really fit in well with this Kraken culture that, it's very obvious Matty Beniers is bringing in, that Ron Francis is trying to cultivate at the top. And I just feel like he's one of those guys that he's got kind of that similar attitude, and I think those are the kinds of guys that I would target for the top 9 role if I was the Kraken. And if you sign them long term, if you don't sign them long term, like they are an addition, and they will make your team a little bit more competitive and exciting to watch.
Yeah. Now, before we move on to the defensemen, I want to cover 2 more top 9 guys that have been talked about quite a bit. And one of them, Penguin, I feel like you'd know him well, Evan Rodriguez. What do you think?
Yeah, so I was just talking on Discord with somebody about Evan Rodriguez last night, actually. Evan Rodriguez, similar guy to Nemestikov. This is a hardworking guy. He's probably got more scoring upside than Nemestikov. I'd argue he definitely does. We could probably say, but I don't know that he really is going to transform this team. He's not going to come in and score a bunch. I know a lot of people were looking at last year's performance for him. He got up to 19 goals. He had 7 power play goals. But when I dug into the numbers, it does not look like that's going to be consistent from him. He shot a ton on the power play last year, which is good and something the Kraken need. Nobody seemed willing to do it much on the power play last year, but he shot at 16% on the power play, which is well above his like career average for a shooting percentage, which hovers, I believe, just below 10%. And so I feel like that kind of artificially inflated both his power play goal numbers and his regular goal numbers. If he's really more of a 15 goal guy with ideal situations, I mean, he was protected in Pittsburgh. He was utilized in the best possible way in Pittsburgh in a way that the Kraken could not repeat. Because again, you're talking about somebody who was like seeing third line, second line minutes there that might be forced into a higher role with the Kraken. He's just not going to be able to deliver on that expectation.
Right. Now the contract projection is 3 million times 3 years. Would you do that?
Yeah, I think so. I think for all these guys, I would do around in there,
Okay.
just because that's it's an appropriate term for the Kraken's timetable, and like we said, really until the Kraken gets super serious, the money almost doesn't matter.
Right. And I think you could basically be allowed one of those contracts for someone who you like, who you're trying to bet on, essentially. I do want to mention another name because I've seen people talk about him in the Discord. Ilya Mikheyev. What do you think there?
I really like him. Again, though, he's super responsible. He's great defensively, PK, all that kind of stuff. And it's like I love all these players. I want the Kraken to sign all these players. Him, Rodriguez, Nemestikov. I love them. I really, really do. It's just I worry about the Kraken loading up on all these like third line quality guys that are now having to play second line quality minutes and
Hmm.
contribute on the power play. And I don't see a team like that making the playoffs. And I
Yep.
don't know that you'd have enough scoring firepower making the playoffs. So it's almost like I'd rather with all of these guys, I'd rather, as I say, the money doesn't matter. I'd rather that money just go all into a gigantic Gaudreau contract, just because I feel like that would actually make more of a dent in the standings for the Kraken.
Agreed. And looking at someone like Mikheyev too, I believe the contract projection is 5 mil times 6 years. I'm playing in Toronto. I mean, that will help you if you hit free agent market. And for a guy who basically doubled his prior career shooting percentage over this past season, I see too many red flags. As much as I really do like his game, I want him in my bottom 6. I want him killing penalties for me, but I want him doing that at a more reasonable contract than 5 million a year.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, last name of these forwards because I have to bring it up, Phil Kessel.
Do it. Yes, fill the thrill. Let's go. Said it last year. We should have traded for him at the deadline. Let's be real. Um, yeah, no. You if you can bring in Phil Kessel, if he's willing to go to your team, you should have him because there are a few guys, even in his advanced age, we'll call it, because I just feel like that's a term he'd enjoy. Um, he's still one of these guys that we saw last year in Arizona. He just decide to take over a game and he can take over a game. He's one of the most skilled hockey players to have ever played this game, and he'll never truly be appreciated for that just because of all the other things going on around him in his career. But I have been there in person when he's decided, hey, I'm not going to lose tonight, and he ensures that his team doesn't lose that night. And I love that aspect. So if you can get him to buy into what you're doing, I say go for it. I don't know that he's willing to buy into any team anymore. Like life in the NHL
Yep.
has really beaten him down. I don't know that you could kind of resurrect that, but if you feel like you can have him around young guys like Matty Beniers and Shane Wright, I say go for it.
Congrats, Dylan. That was the correct answer. It is always yes to Phil Kessel if he will side with your team. So had to leave it on that one. Leave it on a yes. Be a little more positive. Okay, so we're already over the hour mark. We need to get onto the defenseman here. Okay, so this is probably more of a need than top 9 forward. We're talking puck moving defenseman, preferably right-handed. We can talk about that one if you want in a little bit, but that's the need. The Kraken needs someone who can step into that role. With not qualifying Hayden Fleury, that's a defense roster spot that's open. You can fill that kind of at any level, whether it's first pairing, second pairing, third pairing. But they also need someone who can run a power play. They need a power play quarterback. Mark Giordano was in that role while he was with the Kraken last season. I think neither of us were really all that happy with how that went. But you don't want Vince Dunn as your number one guy, I think. As much as you'd like to give him some opportunity, you need someone else, certainly if you're going to be a playoff team, who can quarterback a power play. So, looking at these free agent defensemen, there's one name that stands out above the rest. Far above the rest, I think, as far as just talent-wise, right? And that's John Klingberg. So,
Yeah.
what do we think of John Klingberg, Dylan?
Well, I've liked him for a very, very long time. Since his rookie season, I saw him play one game against the Kings, and I said, okay, this guy's legit. That was a very long time ago now, it feels like. I remember texting you about that. I love John Klingberg. I love everything that he can bring to a team. He can do all those things you just talked about them needing. He can do them. I just think it's going to cost you so much money and so much term that I don't see it being worthwhile for the Kraken to do.
Agreed. And he, along with Burakovsky, is one of the two players that I really fear that the Kraken are going to sign, because I could see them doing it. Because on the ice, at least in the short term, it'd be a very good fit. He's exactly what they need. He's a very good player, but I worry about how much money it's going to cost and what kind of term you have to give him. I'm pretty sure 7 years. He's going to be able to command that. There are no other defensemen on the free agent market that are anywhere near as good as he is. And he's going to take advantage of that, I think. There are going to be a lot of teams that are in that bidding war, and the price will get bid up well beyond what he's worth, I think. You're looking at 7 years, maybe over 7 or 8 million a year, which certainly for a contract that's going to take him, into his late 30s is more than you'd want to do.
Yeah, I mean, look at the defensive signings we've seen over the last couple of years. I mean, we talked about this last offseason as we were looking around the league, and we're seeing the Darnell Nurse contract, the Seth Jones contract, the Zach Werenski contract, right? Like the market for defensemen has been reset. If you're bringing in John Klingberg to be your number one, he's pushing 9. Like the market is 9 really for him. So
I wouldn't be surprised to see it get that high.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be way too rich for the Kraken. I think they're probably still going to be in on him. I just do. I'm getting that feeling. I think there's been way too much smoke for there not to be a little bit of fire there. But I think 9 is probably the realistic number, and we'd all have to ask ourselves, are we down for that?
Right, and I certainly am not, certainly over any kind of longer term. And you compare him too to the free agent signings on defense that were signed last year, and I just don't know that his name really belongs in the conversation with like a Dougie Hamilton or Pietrangelo at that time. He's kind of dropped off a bit, but you see how, like with Pietrangelo, as the age is closer, how quickly a signing like that can drop off. I think, Vegas probably already isn't even getting the value for him. So I think you could see a similar trajectory, given that he is 29 right now, will be 30 by the time next season starts. So yeah, I would steer clear of John Klingberg. I think we both agree on that. Now,
we already saw his play drop off from where it has been. Like he was passed on that Dallas lineup by Heiskanen, who, let's be real, is like kind of next level and just better than most guys anyway. But Klingberg had fallen off. His play had fallen off in Dallas the last really 2 years, in my opinion. So I already think he made that turn.
Right, and the metrics certainly show that when you look at just about anything statistically. These last 2 years, a big drop off. There's reason to believe that maybe he can get his game back, but you're taking a big risk at that point. All right, so beyond Klingberg, there is not a whole lot out there that fits that description. I'm just sorting here by points because we want someone who can move the puck. Ben Sherratt is number 2.
Wow.
Nick Leddy, 3. Anton Strawman, number 4.
The guy we didn't realize was still in the NHL, 4 months ago?
Yep. This is who we're talking about now as you look at these defensemen. Justin Schultz, Nikita Zadorov, not exactly known for his offense.
Yeah.
And we'll get to the name at the seventh spot here, PK Subban. Now, he's someone that's been mentioned a lot as maybe a lower cost alternative. Given how weak the market is for this type of player, I think he might actually be paid, I think in the range of like $3 million a year and can maybe get some term. What do you think of PK Subban? He's 33, not quite the defenseman he once was, but maybe he's still got something left in the tank. Should the Kraken do it?
If you can convince him that his best days are behind him and that he needs to transition in what his expectations are for himself out on the ice, then yes, you should do it. But this is a guy who clearly still thinks he is playing at a level that he is no longer playing at, and that his role on a team is no longer what it is. You know what I mean? Like if you can get him to buy into the fact that, hey, look, you're gonna be on one of our two power play units, you're gonna run that, but it might not be the first one, and at best you're going to be a second pairing guy. Can you get on board with that? And if he's finally gotten to the point where he's going to say yes, I can, then I say go for it all day. Take him at that price. Give him the 4-year term. I don't think that's going to totally wreck you long term or anything. But if he's going to be pushing for bigger minutes or playing like he's still the superstar who can do all the things that he used to be able to do that we all see that he can't, then I don't know that you want that.
Agreed. And I think it will take kind of an attitude change there. I wouldn't feel comfortable really with him above third pairing minutes at even strength, just given, what, especially when you dive into the more analytical measures have shown. I mean, he's just trying to do too much. And you see that also, watching the Sharks with Erik Karlsson since they acquired him. It's the same thing. He's a guy who was a superstar, thinks he can still be a superstar, and unfortunately just is not at that level yet. But I think he can still be very productive for a team. And if he's willing to accept that role, it could make sense. But I also worry about term, being 33, you look at aging curves, the numbers are not on your side there. And as you'll bring up later, I think that, maybe there are some better options further down that you could get for cheaper that might be able to do what Subban can do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, yeah, I watch him defend now, and it's all just clutching and grabbing. There's no stick work. There's no using his body anymore unless he's slew footing someone, which is another kind of problem
That's
you'd have
another
to deal
concern.
with. Yeah, so it's just unfortunate. I love the guy. I think he'd be great for the community, massively. Be great for the media presence, all that stuff. He's a wonderful human being, but the player is not there anymore.
Yep, and I think it's definitely worth mentioning. Off the ice, awesome fit anywhere he goes. Yeah, great person would be great, and for an expansion team trying to get more fan excitement too, absolutely fits into that. So I'm scrolling down this list, and man, I'm just not seeing any names that really fit for what the Kraken are looking for. Until I stop here at a certain player that you may have mentioned in the last podcast that you teased, I think, could be the answer to all the Kraken's problems.
Yes.
So, Dylan, take it away. Why should the Kraken sign Colin Miller?
Well, they should sign Colin Miller because he's not going to cost you that much. He's the perfect buy low candidate with a history of being good when he's not playing for the Buffalo Sabres, which in my mind is a pretty safe thing. You can reasonably assume someone will get good again if they leave the Buffalo Sabres. I truly believe in that. If you were good before, you'll be good after. But you can buy low because he was most recently with the Buffalo Sabres, but he's right-handed. I think, you know, outside of Klingberg, there is no one out there that was going to reasonably challenge you, for a top pairing role on your team. But I think Colin Miller is good enough to potentially be on your second line. When you look at his analytics, including in Buffalo, he managed to be an average-ish guy for the Buffalo Sabres, given everything going on around him there. But if you look at his time with Vegas before that, this was a really sneaky good player that was just kind of lost in everything in the bright Vegas lights, basically. You know what I mean? You look at any of his advanced Chrome as I'm on my grandparents' Wi-Fi, the call almost drops. So I'm not going to read you specific numbers, but all the way down the lineup to the point where I'm looking at these numbers for like expected rebounds off of shots as a defenseman, and he's like, way up there, S tier kind of guy back when he was with Vegas and stuff. Like he brings all these sneaky good things. He can move the puck. He can shoot from the blue line. He can, I don't know that you'd want him necessarily on your power play, but if Vince Dunn is on the first unit and Carson Soucy's not really working on the second unit, you could give him a shot reasonably. And I think you could buy low. You could lock him into a 3 or 4 year term at very little money, 3.5, 4 million, 4.5 at the absolute most, and know that you're going to have a rock solid second line guy that if you push him to the third, he's not going to be upset by that. And I just think that that's very valuable to the Kraken, especially because, let's be real, Riker Evans is going to be the puck moving defenseman that they're going to bring in. I said it at the end of last season. I watched him, all through last season at the WHL. That dude is ready. He's going to play for this Kraken team, and he's going to be the guy over the course of the season taking over the power play. Just like with Shane Wright being the top 9 guy coming in, realistically, Riker Evans is realistically this defenseman that Ron Francis wants, but I think Colin Miller is kind of the guy that the Kraken need to round out their bottom half of their defense and stabilize things.
Right. Now, you've made some really good points. It seems like he could be a good stopgap there. And having just watched Riker Evans in day 1 of the Kraken's development camp, I agree wholeheartedly with you. He is out on a mission to make the roster out of training camp. And you know what? I think he'll do it. So he could be the puck moving defenseman. I think you still probably need a guy on the right side, someone to maybe compete with Will Borgen, and can provide that. Maybe it'll be a little bit stopgap so you don't have to throw Riker Evans right into the deep end of the pool right away. Give him a little time to kind of get his feet under him and really get comfortable. My last question on Colin Miller, though, can he stay healthy, Dylan?
Yes, I don't think he can stay healthy. I think he's proven at this point that he cannot stay healthy at all. But as long as he stays healthy long enough that one of Will Borgen or Riker Evans can be eased into the lineup and is ready to then take over for him, you're fine. That's all you need. You basically only need someone for 35 games to get the other two up to speed. And once they are, go ahead and let him pass you by. But like I said, I feel like so many of the problems, like he's not going to be Jeremy Lauzon defensively for us.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like he's going to be solid. He'll play okay in the defensive zone. He'll get the puck out of the zone. He can contribute on offense. Like a lot of just that stabilizing force on defense that they were missing as they were cycling through Hayden Fleury, as they were cycling through Cale Fleury, as they were cycling through Will Borgen at times. You know what I mean? Like all that stuff. He solidifies that enough that you can work with those two younger players and get them ready to, hopefully be better players for you long term and everything. And that's why I want them to bring him in.
You know what? That makes sense to me. Okay, I am sold on Colin Miller. I think you delivered on the hype, Dylan. I mean, everyone can let us know in the comments and the replies whether they agree, but you're right. I think Colin Miller would be a good flyer for the Kraken to take. Now, looking at this list of defensemen, is there anyone else you want to talk about? Because I'm not seeing it.
No. The other thing with Colin Miller is because he could potentially play better, he's a good trade chip a year out from now, too. Like you sign him for a reasonable deal, you'd be able to move him in the future once everybody's ready. And I don't feel that potential is elsewhere in this market, and that's why I've zeroed in on him so much.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And also a player who plays the type of game that he does, if he's playing well, is always a valuable trade asset. So if you can kind of rehabilitate the game there, he's absolutely someone you could trade, and he's still younger than 30 for the moment. So that could be good.
Your seal of approval then.
Exactly. Yeah, I knew you'd mention that. So all good in my book until October 29th, where he turns 30. So that's all you need. Okay. Moving on to goaltending, because unfortunately that is a need for the Kraken at this point, with Chris Drieger looking like he'll miss a good chunk of next season. Here's what I feel about the goalie market. You're going to need someone who is essentially a disposable throwaway goalie someone who can just pick up a temporary spot. And anyone who is good enough to have any kind of free agent leverage is not going to want to sign in a situation like that. But anyone who, who's good enough to really pick up that role and maybe play 30 games and help you to a playoff spot, is probably also in that category as well. Do you see any names that work here, Dylan, that might thread the needle, that maybe would find it appealing enough to go to Seattle, but also would not be, kind of desperate enough that maybe they couldn't help?
Can I plead the fifth here? As the real reason I left Southern California was the army of goaltenders outside my house with pitchforks and torches.
Yeah, you know what? I will accept that for the time being, just because I want you safe. I want you okay. I don't want the goalie army coming after you, just quite yet. So, looking at the goalies, I'll start here. Obviously, the top tier, Kemper, Campbell, Samsonov are out of play. I feel like it's going to be someone in the Dustin Tokarski tier, really. I think that's kind of the name you might see. Maybe Jaro Halak. That's my best case scenario, is Yaroslav Halak. That maybe he wouldn't want to go too far away after just being in Vancouver last year, that he might sign with the Kraken. That's my best case. Maybe a David Riddick. Wasn't all that thrilled by what I saw of him in Nashville, but he's at least someone with NHL experience. 886 save percentage last year. Would need to improve on that. I know, I don't like that. Looking at the guys, I'm just sorting by save percentage here. There are only 6 goalies with a 900 save percentage last season or higher available in the UFA market. That's not very many. And it's Kemper, who is going to sign for big money elsewhere. Eric Comrie, who I think is going to be a really good low-key backup somewhere else. Jack Campbell, another big money guy. Braden Holtby, who is looks like his career might be over. Jaro Halak, who I just mentioned. And the last one, Martin Jones.
Oh boy, RJ.
This is what we're left with.
You know what? I never thought I'd say this. I think I want Martin Jones. Like, I'm with you. I think Halak is like the dream, which is like insane to say, because what is he now? Like, he's got to be like 37, right?
He is 37, yes.
Okay, yeah. So, but I never thought I'd say it. But Martin Jones, I think he's reasonable to bring in, because you know what? What have you and I seen from Martin Jones, RJ? We saw him on the Stanley Cup run where he was just big with good positioning in net, and he got things done. Like, he's the only guy with a reasonable chance of coming in, potentially starting 30 games and giving you like a 913 save percentage in those games.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but no. Martin Jones is not that player anymore. I'm sorry, I've watched enough games of Martin Jones to tell you he is not that player anymore, and that maybe he could even give you a 900 save percentage season like he did with the Flyers last year. But what he will do is allow goals that are so soft, just momentum killing goals. He might make some saves he has no business making, but the soft goals, they're a problem. And it's just going to kill momentum for the Kraken. We saw what some of those did early on in the season when it was Grubauer playing like that. You just can't afford to have another goalie come in and get beat clean as often as Martin Jones does. You need someone who at least will give the team, like, make them feel like they have a chance in the game if they play well. And I just, it's not good for the team around him. I cannot, as someone who followed the Sharks for all those years, I cannot recommend Martin Jones. I just can't do it.
I mean, basically, as we know, right? If you can elevate the puck, you're going to score on Martin Jones.
Yes. High glove side, you will score. High blocker side, probably. I don't know. Give me the Hamburglar, Andrew Hammond, over Martin Jones at this point.
Really, what we've come around to is probably what most NHL teams already know, and what Ron Francis already knows, which is you can have one expensive, your starter goaltender, but really after that, you need to make sure you have just a couple in your system that you're developing and have ready to go, because that's the only time you're going to reasonably find a backup that you feel like you can trust.
Right. And we see that with some of the top teams. See that with Colorado being able to turn to Francouz, in the playoffs, someone they've had for a while. You see it with the Blues with Binnington and Husso winning the cup. It's something that and even Jake Allen, who was in their system when Binnington took over. You just need someone who's homegrown who can take over. By virtue of being an expansion team, the Kraken don't have that yet. But I tell you, these names make Joey Decord look a lot better.
They really do.
All right. So this is a long podcast. I think we're at the hour and a half mark. Thank you everyone who stayed with us at this point. One more thing I do want to cover. Because today was RFA day, there are some players here who were restricted free agents that were not qualified by their teams that are now going to be unrestricted free agents, free to sign with anyone. I want to really quickly just cover some of these guys, see if there's anyone that might make sense for the Kraken. And because they're younger, it might make more sense for what their window is. Just real quick, Dylan Strome, what do you think?
I like him a lot. I think he's finally kind of coming around as an NHL player. I just don't think he makes sense on the Kraken now that they have Shane Wright.
Yep, he's a center. He's someone you might want to take a bet on if you draft a winger or a defenseman, but I wouldn't go there. Okay, I have to mention this name, the Kraken killer, Rem Pitlick. I kind of want to see them bring him in. I would love that as a depth free agent signing.
I mean, we know he can score in the building, so why not?
Yep, like hat trick automatically every time he's in Climate Pledge Arena. So I say go for it. That's sustainable, right?
Yeah.
All right, we got some names. Let's see. Danton Heinen, Dominic Kubalik, Andre Kasha. Maybe those fit into I don't know. I'd say probably
like
pass.
The bottom 9 guys, or the top 9 guys that we were talking about, where it's like, yeah, they can be good players and they can help you out, but like they're not going to fix anything for this team.
No, they're not. Evgeny Svechnikov. I think you just have enough of these guys. The more you scroll down, Adam Gaudette, you have enough of these players who already kind of do what these guys do in your system. Victor Mete, you a Victor Mete fan?
Sure.
Okay. So I think we've covered all these guys. Just Rem Pitlick. Go out and get Rem Pitlick is what I'm trying to say. That's what that whole segment was about.
Yes. He's the only one that with my eyeballs I've seen be very successful in Climate Pledge Arena. So I'm all for it.
Now that's very important, of course. So anyway, this has been our free agent recap. Longer episode, but hey, there's a lot of free agents to cover. Hopefully we got to everyone you were hoping to hear about. Free agency starts on Wednesday. And it should be exciting too, because there's no tampering window beforehand where teams can talk to players. It's all going to kind of just develop organically once we hit Wednesday and teams can start talking to guys. Okay, Dylan, last question. What is your one wish for the Kraken in this free agent period?
I don't know. That Nemestikov. I just
Nemestikov?
want
Okay,
yep.
that's your wish.
That's what I want.
Okay. For me, I'll go with don't sign anyone to a term longer than 3 years. I know that's unrealistic, but that's what I want.
Basically my answer too.
All right. So there we go. That has been our free agency recap, free agency preview. Maybe I said that the first time. It's been a long episode. All right. That's our free agency preview. Hope you all enjoyed it. Yeah. One more thing.
Well, I was going to say the cliffhanger, the Colin Miller cliffhanger worked really well last time.
It did.
I feel like I'm going to try to do something similar. Okay. And,
all right.
And that is for the next episode of the deep dive, because in that we'll probably cover development camp and everything. I think Matty Beniers is going to be the Seattle Kraken's captain. He's going to be named captain by the end of September.
Wow. Okay, that is a bold prediction, and we will find out why you think that when we see you next time. Hi everyone, it's RJ. Before you go, be sure to check out our new Shane Wright merch that just dropped. We have 2 brand new designs, the Right Choice and my personal favorite, 3 Wrongs Make a Right, with the draft board and the 3 teams who passed on him in red. It's the perfect way to cheer on Shane at training camp and help support Emerald City Hockey while you do it. If you're watching this on YouTube, link to our store will be in the description below. If you're listening on a podcast app, you can find everything on our website, emeraldcityhockey.com/store. Thanks for listening.